Thank you, Christine. My name is Bruce Poinsett. I'm with Respond to Racism LO, and I'll be introducing our presenters tonight. First, Dr. Andres Lopez is a trained sociologist and professional research and evaluation scientist. Academically, his training and research centered on how inequalities of race, gender, and sexuality are reproduced in organizations in urban settings. He has expertise in a wide range of research methodologies that utilize feminist, anti-racist, and queer theories. He has over 10 years of experience conducting action research meant for solving social/practical problems and equitable evaluations of programs, processes, and organizations. Dr. Mira Mohseni is a trained cultural anthropologist. She has conducted ethnographic research in India on urban craft economies, with a focus on how Muslim artisans adapt, survive, and create in the midst of multiple intersecting forms of marginalization. She has developed and taught university-level courses on Islam and Muslim societies, race and racism, gender and sexuality, immigration, and research methods. Mira has also worked as a researcher and evaluator on multilateral international development projects in South Asia. Her experience in participatory action research has driven work around co-constructing sustainable livelihood strategies, program monitoring and evaluation, and capacity building with grassroots coalitions and nonprofits. Please join me in welcoming Mira and Andres from the Coalition of Communities of Color.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Andres. Thank you for that lovely introduction. I feel kind of embarrassed. Those professional credentials. At the end of the day, I'm a community researcher. That's really how I identify and how I see myself. So, and Mira as well. She's getting the slides up for us, but I just wanted to take a second to say how good it feels to be here with you all. There's a lot of darkness surrounding us these days, and I've been working really hard to seek the light and to shine my light and uplift my light, and I feel that with you all here today. So I just wanted to share that back to you and hope that we can all collectively keep working towards action and towards searching for the light, which is what our world really needs. So, thank you. So, yeah, we did this report. I do want to say too, this is not just the work of Mira and myself. We also have some amazing colleagues that work with us. Our data manager, Kanya Masibi, our research associate, Paulette Campos Melchor, and also our data ecosystems manager, Dallas Haley. They all played an important role in helping this work get done. And even more so, you can go to the next slide actually. I wanted to, acknowledge the land, which we already started with, so thank you for that. But really the people. This report was about collective action. It was about hearing from community members who don't get to be heard from. It was about telling truths that are not told. So this isn't really as much of a reflection of us as researchers as much as it is a reflection of all of the Clackamas County community members over the course of 3.5 years, 400 plus people, lots and lots and lots of hours of work and discussion and thinking. So we hope that that rings true in this report because what we need most now is lived experience. We need the people who are experiencing the world, the good and the bad of it, and we need those lived experiences to move us forward, right? So people who are experiencing houselessness, we need to know what they think and what they need. That lived experience is the data and evidence we need for decision making, not just our elected official and some statistical equation that they figured out, right? We need real humans guiding us and leading us on what we need to do differently. So that was the goal of this report, was to really shine a light on that. And you may not be surprised to know that a lot of dominant institutions in Clackamas County don't know what to do with this. They're like, this is great, beautiful, what do we do now? Which I thought was clear in the recommendations, but we got some work to do. So today is about thinking about those recommendations and using your own lived experience from what you know about living in Clackamas County and what you do here and what you've experienced here, and thinking about how we get into action and how we make these things come true, and not just exist in a report or tell a story about them. So the last thing I'll say is about desires. This report is about desire. We want to do research. We want to collect evidence about what people want. I don't want to talk about how shitty, excuse my language, everything is and how harmful and everything being about disparity. I want to know, what is the world we want to live in? What is the community we want to have? What's worth waking up every day and living for? That's what our desire, that's what should be leading us, right? So this report is also a lot about the desires of Clackamas County residents, about the future they want to see. So just wanted to share that. Thank you. Okay, I'm passing it off to Mira. We'll do a little back and forth here, but hopefully we'll be done in about 15 minutes so we can move on to the next part.
That is a hope. Hi everyone. It's really lovely to see so many of you here, and I think I've seen many of your faces online and many of your faces in person, and it's really lovely to be here with you all for this really important event. So we wanted to go through this a little bit chapter by chapter, very brief overview, because the report is available to download on our website. So it's out there, but we just wanted to give you sort of our take on it, I guess. So we, like Andres said, this was a 3.5, almost 4+ year project that really gave us so much insight into Clackamas County. We don't live in Clackamas County, you live kind of close to the line. But as researchers, we're not being from this place, we really again needed to spend a lot of time on the front end of this project building relationships, and that's something that often is not articulated as a core component of research, is relationships. But doing a research justice study means that it is inherently a relationships-based research project. So we spent a lot of 2020 into 2021 really building those relationships, meeting with those hundreds of people that Andres talked about. And again, we spent time forming a steering committee of people of color who have lived experience in various areas of working in the county, living in the county, worshiping in the county. And so we had initially 12-member steering committee that became a 10-member steering committee. And we really worked with them almost till the very end of this project. They really guided this work. Oh yeah, and then we also, through the course of building those relationships, particularly when we were talking with public school administrators, we learned that students are at the forefront of a lot of equity work in schools, a lot of anti-hate work in schools. And so we decided we have to have student perspective in this report. So then we organized a parallel student-led steering committee. And maybe some of you heard of the Step Up Clackamas event that we did back in 2023. On the campus of Clackamas Community College. That was that effort. They really wanted an event where they could learn how to write testimony so that they can go in front of their school board and really powerfully share their stories. And they wanted it to be about joy. We literally had a red carpet in the event space because that's what they wanted. So anyway, we spent a lot of time doing this, and I hope that work and that community commitment and dedication really comes through in the report itself. So like I said, this is a research justice study, and I just wanted to highlight some of the key elements of what that means, because it's very different than a traditional, well, I wouldn't say traditional, but a dominant research study. So marginalized people are experts of their lived experience. That, again, like Andres was saying, that is the fundamental reality and belief that drives everything in this research, in research justice. We elevate diverse ways of knowing, so we're not just saying we're going to do this research so that we can come up with tables of statistics. We want to highlight stories and experiences. We want to highlight needs and challenges, and we want to highlight desires, and often that comes through words, that often comes through art, that comes in so many different ways of articulating and expressing an experience. So we wanted the research to represent that. Communities lead the research. Like I said, we worked with 2 different steering committees that were made up of people who have lived in Clackamas County sometimes for decades. And then the calls to action. Findings are translated into calls to action. Research justice is about changing the conditions of social life, social, economic, political life, right? Like without that direction that will lead to change, it's not a research justice study, right? We're just sharing some findings without any calls for what to do with them. So we dedicated an entire chapter to the calls to action. I think they're on your table as well. But I just also want to highlight that throughout the report, there are various actually calls to action that are articulated, like in the case studies, in the words of community members. They're all throughout the report. We wanted to just condense and synthesize them into a chapter so that they're accessible. We learned early on in the process that what people in Clackamas County are really telling us, as articulated in challenges, in needs and desires, is they want a sense of belonging. So belonging became that core concept that drove everything in this research. And very early on, we realized that we need to approach this research from a dual perspective, right? First of all, we need to understand what is belonging. Belonging is kind of a buzzword these days, it's kind of thrown around a lot. And we're like, we're not just gonna throw this word around in our research without really trying to understand it from a community-led perspective. And what that led us to was to think about belonging from 2 perspectives. One is, how can BIPOC communities lead the way towards creating the conditions for belonging? The second is, how can dominant systems and actors create and support the conditions of belonging? So we're really working on these 2 very important levels. One is community-led, right? Communities really understand what are the conditions that are needed to support their thriving and belonging. And what can dominant systems like governments, universities, other powerful organizations and systems do to support these needs and desires? The second way that we wanted to think about belonging is that, like, okay, conceptually this is good, right? Like, we have belonging are these, like, from these 2 perspectives, but then how do you operationalize that? How, like, if I'm coming to you, Department of Human Services or Clackamas County, and I'm telling you all this great stuff about belonging and what it means and blah, 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 that person at the Department of Human Services is gonna be like, okay, but like, what do I do? Like, tell me what to do. So we wanted to make sure that all of these, like, nice conceptual ideas are grounded in action, excuse me. So we created this assessment framework. So how can, if you're in an organization, and it doesn't have to be a dominant, if you're in a community-based organization, a nonprofit, a grassroots organization, you really are passionate about ensuring that the conditions of belonging are supported, you can use this framework, which is explained in depth in the report, to really think about what are the questions I need to be asking, what are the data I need to be collecting, and how can these questions and data lead to forms of decision making that really support the operationalization of belonging. So this is a framework that we created, again, based on all the knowledge that we learned from our community members and from engaging with dominant institutions as well.
Okay, thank you. So in chapter 3, we talked a little bit about Clackamas County context. Because Clackamas County is urban, rural, suburban, and wild, it's very different than the rest of the counties in the metro area. So it was really important to us to acknowledge that there's humans that live in all those different areas, and there's different realities that they experience. And we also wanted to provide some quantitative data and some spatial data, so maps, so that governments and other folks accessing this could sort of see who are the people of Clackamas County, where do they live, what's important to know about that. So we did a little bit of mapping, working with some students at the community college about how to visualize this different regions, right? So this urban, suburban, rural, wild. And so we did this approach, which in the report, there's a lot more details about how we got here. If you want to be nerdy, you can go check that out. But the overview is you can kind of see the colors, right, of urban, suburban, rural, wild. And then you can see the total populations, the BIPOC populations, as well as the percentage of BIPOC populations. So these numbers might be kind of jarring to some people because they might not have ever realized that there are this many people of color living throughout Clackamas County, right? Which is another part of this report, right? Is that our communities are often silenced, are often made invisible, right? It's not known that, look at how many of these people are paying taxes, are going to your schools, right? Are worshiping in your communities, right? So it was really important for us to lay this out, and we also have some more information about language. If you want to skip to the next slide, I think. Oh yeah, okay. So there's also some other data that we collected around housing, around food, around transportation. And then this is an example of the language table in there. And again, it breaks it up by geo-region. But you can see, because we don't have race data that may be accurate for everyone in the region, we use language as a way to sort of demonstrate the diversity of humans living in Clackamas County. So you can see these percentages of all these different language speakers that don't speak English, right? And it is a law that our county requires services not in English to the people who live in their county. And almost every state, I would say almost every county in the state of Oregon is nearly out of compliance with that law. They are not providing this sort of support for the people that they by law are supposed to provide, right? So this was another way of sort of demonstrating the diversity and getting folks to think about what language should you prioritize and what communities can you be more thoughtful about when it comes to culture. Okay, so chapter 4, this is also a little bit of a nerd academic flex. But it was really important because we really wanted to break down some of these basic concepts. Well, maybe I shouldn't say basic, excuse me, but concepts of about race in our society, right? Because people really struggle with understanding what does all this mean. And I got a PhD in this stuff, so it took me a long time myself, even as a queer person of color, to understand it, right? So we wanted to just sort of create these little sections. And you go to the next slide. To kind of help folks understand. So I'm going to just briefly walk you through this, right? So perceptions of belonging and othering in the United States. Our country has often othered people, have said, these people are American, these people are not, right? There's a long history of this, but a lot of implications about what that means. So we talk about this concept of belonging and othering is not new. Like, this has been a part of the American project since the beginning, right? Then we talk a little bit about whiteness, about this concept of whiteness. And I don't just mean white skin. There's lots of people in the world who have white skin, right? But that in America, we wanted to erase all of those histories. We didn't want you to be French or German or Italian, right, or Mexican or whatever. And a lot of immigrants who were white, light-skinned, who could pass as white, started aligning themselves with the white majority, right? Or maybe not the majority, but ways that are perceived as whiteness. And in America, that has mostly been to be anti-black, right? So Irish immigrants, in the ghettos with black folks, well, actually, you're white. So you should get on board with the rest of these white folks and not deal with those black folks, right? That is a long history in our society. That's happened to many racial groups over many, many terms. So when we talk about whiteness, we're actually talking about a historical racialization process and a current one that's still happening, in which some people are labeled as white and others are not, right? So that's an important part of race to understand. So then race and racialization. So then we talk a little bit about these two concepts, right? That in one way, race is real and race is not real, because anthropologically speaking, there's actually more difference among white folks than there would be amongst a white person and you call me Latino or whatever, or brown, right? Like in our genetics, in our DNA, it's not real. This is all made up. Right, but it's made up for a reason. And historically, it's been made up in ways and used in ways that's been very violent and horrible, right? And that process is called racialization. So it's not something that just happens because you're white or you're not. There's a process in which we label certain people of a race, a process in which that happens. And so race scholars study racialization. So they study, how the heck did these people get labeled this way, right? Like how in this context is that happening, right? So we just talked a little bit by saying that this is real and not real, and the way you can tell is that there's been a process, and it still continues today of racializing certain groups, right? So we end this section talking about addressing racism. Well, if it's not real, then why don't we just stop it, right? Like, right? And this is what happened in America. This is where colorblind ideology was born, because after the civil rights movement, we told all good white people, don't talk about race. Race isn't real. If you don't see it, it'll be fine. We won't raise our kids seeing race anymore, right? But what that process just did was make us really blind, or excuse me, not blind, but made us not understand the ways in which race was really alive and well, the way that racialization was happening in all sorts of contexts and all sorts of ways, right? So it made us even more ignorant to understanding race because we thought we could just unsee it. Right, but we can't because this is a social process. It's not an individual in my head, well, a little bit of that too, but it's really a social process that happens, right? So anyways, there's a lot of big ideas in here, lots of really great book recommendations if you want to learn more about race and how people have studied the history of race in America. But we kind of wanted to just make sure that we did provide this because there's a lot of people who don't believe that racism is real and that it's not structural or that it's not constructed. When we have a lot of evidence to the contrary. So